We are now going to go to Ute Heggen. Ute's just published a book which looks amazing. It's called In the Curated Woods, True Tales from a Grass Widow, When Your Husband Claims to Be You, a story of trauma and recovery. So Ute, she writes about the trauma and recovery process of women mothers whose husbands have claimed a female identity and erase our roles through identifying themselves as the mothers of our children. Ute's memoir, In the Curated Woods, published at iuniverse.com/bookstore, I'll put that in the chat, is available through Amazon and these places. And you can either buy it in America, or you can get it in e-copy in the way we'll get it. So Ute's journey started as a trans widow in 1992 when Ute discovered her then husband's diaries of his cross-dressing. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for waiting.
Yes, so I'm Ute Heggen, that's my pen name, and I'm author of this book, In the Curated Woods, which documents my 9 months of sort of really focused self-recovery from something that started exactly 30 years ago this month. There are several reasons that I didn't use the term trans widow in the subtitle, although I was advised to quite a few times. I'm tired of writing the word trans. And as well, I thought my book might get banned from some of the platforms just for having trans and widow together in the same place. The term grass widow was used in Europe to denote a woman who chose to live independently. It actually goes back, it's cited as far back as 1528. And I felt that I wanted to use this more female-centered term, which to me maybe tells us that there were women in the past who decided they had to leave a husband and figured out how to live independently. And they were given the honorific involving widow, even though the man they were married to was still living. So that was my rationale behind the use of the word grass widow. I would actually sort of like to revive it in a way. For quite a while, I was unaware of the attacks on J.K. Rowling and the trend of young women to start identifying as males. When I figured out that my status as the ex-wife of a man who ideates that he's a woman was much more common, this is maybe 3 years ago, especially after I discovered Tinsel Angel's website. She is also a trans widow, and her website is transwidowsvoices.org, where there are many testimonials of women like me. I realized that most men like Nettie, which is the pen name of my now ex-husband, in my writing, I realized that they were also self-identifying as mothers of the children. And this was an issue that back in the 1990s, when we were going through the divorce and the custody battle, the judge specifically wrote, I remember by hand at the end, that only Ute is to be referred to as the children's mother, because some things had already happened where he had omitted my name at all as being the mother of the children on some school documents and things like that. And I brought them to court. And so the judge said, no, this can't happen. But what's changed since the early 2000s is the word gender replacing sex. And so it's, I spoke to a well-versed attorney from New York City who, for example, said that people can say they're gender fluid. Parents of children can say they're gender fluid, and they have the right to one day say, I'm the mom, and then next week they can say, I'm the dad, which it just doesn't seem to me to be caring for the children at all. So, and there are very few of us who have gotten published. I had to self-publish. I know that Christine Benvenuto wrote a book, I think in 2012, that was published by St. Martin's Press called Sex Changes. And from excerpts that I've read of it, her ex-husband sounds very much like the egotistical and arrogant character that my ex-husband is. And I just heard yesterday that a woman named whose pen name is Sharon Thrace will be publishing a memoir about the same situation, which is titled 18 Months. So I guess you can imagine what that means. And as far as I can tell, she's the only the fifth woman to publish a book about our experiences. And I know that actually an affiliate of WDI, Vaishnavi Sundar, interviewed me and several other trans widows extensively. And in 2023, she will be releasing her documentary about us. And I believe the title is Behind the Looking Glass. So we are very much discouraged from telling our side of the stories. And I feel that in many ways, it's very much a parallel with lesbians who want to be able to have their women-only spaces and not have a male body intruding into their meetings and their dating apps and things like this. And in fact, just last year, I found that just exactly how pedantic and directed and focused this suppression of our stories is, because there's a webpage online, which is called the Trans Journalists Association Style Guide. And it's anonymous. There's no names connected with it. However, it has been basically adopted by all the mainstream press organizations, at least in the United States. And it's about, very copiously asking a person's pronouns and never mentioning that they used to identify as the opposite sex, and unless they want to talk about it. But they also do have a couple of paragraphs regarding the families and the ex-wives, and they are making a recipe of how journalists are supposed to write, rather than letting journalists do their job as neutral reporters of what's going on. And they advise that the family's feelings and reactions are overdone and just don't cover them. So that was quite a revelation for me. I was just at the end of putting my book together when I read that, and it just sort of made sense to me. I realized that I think that one reason it's important for women my age who went through this, going way back to the early 90s, should be talking. And I'm, I have to use a pen name, but I'm going to appear in interviews, with my image and everything, and take that risk. Because I feel for the younger women that this is happening to, and often they are worried about being canceled and losing their job, being accused of things, and it kind of goes on and on. There's one woman that Graham Linehan had interviewed, and she said that recently her daughter, I think her children live with her, but her daughter has been influenced by all of this equality talk for the gender woo. And she said straight to her mother, when her mother was, talking about kids identifying as non-binary, and that might be a slippery slope, and, I think you girls need to learn to appreciate your body. Her daughter turned to her and said, "Yeah, but you're a war criminal." And I think in a way, maybe my children would say such a strong thing about me. I have two grown sons. And at this point, because I have written this book, and because I refuse to call my ex-husband a woman, what happened was the exact time was a year ago in June. I was looking him up online. He's a COO of a database management company. And I figured out a couple of things based on what I found online, and dates going way back, and how he was identifying himself in his job. And I realized that he actually must have committed fraud in court about the finances and about his jobs, which were not described that way in court. And he skipped out of paying child support and paying for the college expenses, which he had signed to pay at the end, in the finalizing of the divorce. And I am actually entitled in my state, in New York State, to take him back to court, but I just don't want to put myself through that, despite the fact that with the legal fees that I had to spend to force him to pay something towards our son's college, and the child support that I was out for about 7 years, that total is over $100,000 US. Now, I have always been very frugal, and I'm fortunate that when my parents died a few years ago, I inherited some money. So I don't want people to think that I'm impoverished, or I'm lucky enough that I developed some strength. I have a whole program of sort of personal mental health recovery, which does not involve taking a lot of pills. So it's exactly 30 years ago this month that I discovered my husband's 3 journals, which were large sketchbooks filled with his unique fine line printing. He wrote about cross-dressing in Manhattan, which we lived in Brooklyn at the time. And at that time, my children were 1 and 4, and I was still nursing the 1-year-old. And so I was suddenly very frightened about what he might be doing as far as having any kind of sexual encounters and what he could possibly be bringing home to me. And I don't know if it could possibly go through breast milk or something. It was this very unique, nursing mother pattern of thought. So there was the initial shock and his suicide narrative and erratic behavior. And then I left about 6 weeks after I discovered it. And then shortly after that, he detransitioned, although that word detransition wasn't a word that was used at the time. In fact, he called himself a transsexual. The gender part of it wasn't in the nomenclature yet. I think he really wanted to not be called a transvestite. He wanted to be called a true transsexual. That was somehow important to him. But he detransitioned, grew a beard, and he pressured me to come back and told me I had no proof of his secret identity because I didn't have any copies of the journals, and he'd grown a beard. And I came back in January of 1993. And then I lived what I call my 2 years of purgatory. So one point that I really want to make is about the mental health practitioners, because this piece of the window into it that we trans widows have, often we've had some kind of contact with the mental health practitioners that our husbands have gone to and diagnosed them, usually in one appointment. And we also have gotten reports. We have a lot of, well, she said this, and I'm supposed to tell you this, and, people stay together and they stay married. So there were 2 mental health practitioners involved at the time. And he stopped going to them when he detransitioned, but then he went back to them about 6 months later in secret. And one is a PhD, in quotes, sexologist who is still in practice in New York City. And she submitted sworn testimony later in our custody case, though she had not met me. And I know that she diagnosed him as a transsexual in one appointment on July 20th of 1993, because that was in her sworn testimony. And apparently for the sexologist at that time, they took it as a point of pride that they could spot someone with this diagnosis and diagnose them in one appointment. And there's a lot of back and forth going on now about this, especially after this advertising that the Boston Children's Hospital did and the outraged reaction to that. Now doctors are starting to say, no, it's a slow process. We talk to the families. For me, I know that wasn't true in my case. So, yeah. And so I just went through this process, and of, raising my children. I started to take some classes, and I was always worried about what is he doing and what is he not telling me. I felt like I was a woman who didn't have agency. I had done some little part-time jobs, but I was really the at-home mother. But in the end of March 1995, I realized that Nettie must have been on estrogen for quite some time, secretly, as he was getting breast development. It was the night before our younger son's 4-year birthday party. And I had already previously told Nettie that I'm not interested in doing something with sexual role play or the use of sex toys or changing any of our intimate relations to explore whether I could live with him like we used to see couples go on the Oprah show. And there was this other practitioner that Nettie went, that was the real week-to-week person. I call her Ruth the Charlatan in the book. And she had no counseling credentials of any kind. And I think that this is not so uncommon with this. She took cash only. Her credential was she was the wife of a doctor, and she had a convenient studio near Grand Central Station. And she had some kind of ad hoc partnership with this PhD psychologist, sexologist, and was supposedly working under her supervision. But I did meet her. I never met the psychologist, but I did meet her. I felt that I had to go. It was probably a month later, April 1995. I had to go to have an appointment with her and tell her, you're not going to be able to help Nettie change me. He keeps on coming back saying, oh, but Ruth says this, and we could stay together, and if our marriage ends, it's really you who's breaking up our family. And so it's this kind of coercion, this brainwashing. I think he really honestly believed that. He wouldn't take responsibility for all the secrecy and spending money and not being there. He missed a lot of our young children's beautiful bedtimes. So the aggressive stance that we see now in gender ideology is what I experienced as one datum. So that's my motivation for doing this writing. I want to stress, though, that in my book, I write about the heartbreaks, but I also write about the many joys of my childhood. And I write about my butterfly gardening. And I can see butterflies out in my beautiful garden right now, which is designed on an English border garden. And I'm a citizen scientist. I count how many butterflies I have visiting me, and I'm really trying to just move forward in my life. I wish that I could say that I could join in some protests personally like that. But I think that actually a woman like me, speaking of the experience very directly, the shock that the wives are subjected to and the mother erasure is actually quite threatening to the people in the gender ideology. So they will respond very aggressively. I also especially focused in my writing on my relationship with my mother and my grandmothers, because I really wanted to stress what is womanhood, what is motherhood. And I think it's really important. I cannot in any way say that my husband experienced, anything like I did as a woman, having certain kind of women's wisdom passed down to me from my mother and my grandmothers. I find it offensive, actually. Many of my friends have suggested that I should just stop talking about it because it's so painful. And I see the whole thing as a problem that is better understood as some kind of connection between possibly OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and body dissociation. Nettie was beaten as a child. He was an abused child, and that was never processed. Oddly, his parents became strangely happy after he told them that he was going to do all these things. And they had something like 8 hours of appointments with the sexologist, and they got told that it's not their fault. But he had a very distant, difficult, angry father. See, the wives are the ones who can say, actually, I don't think they ever took a family history, you know. And I'm a retired kindergarten teacher. I had taught early grade science and pre-K over a 25-year career. And with my training for children, you know, I see what's going on now as just, you know, truly violating all of the principles of child development. So I have my experience as the beleaguered wife, then ex-wife, but I also have other perspectives. And one thing I really appreciated actually long ago, you know, back in the 90s, when I was just living through the immediate trauma, was my lesbian friends said, listen, you know, we don't like those guys either. We don't want the tea there. And I was like, oh, right, you know. So, and in fact, I have a lesbian friend that I've known for over a decade that we taught in the same school. And I remember she's like maybe a year or two older than me, so late 60s. And she said, oh, we just always had to be quiet about that. We weren't allowed, you know, we couldn't. And I just thought, wow, you know, it's just been interesting. I feel like I have things in common with the detransitioners because of my perspective on what the mental health practitioners are doing. I have affinities with the lesbian community, and I have especially rather alarmed concerns about the children of our world who are being told lies by their teachers.
There's lots of people who have different they say there are different motivations for this happening. And what do you think? Can you summarize what you think the motivation of your husband, and also why are the institutions going along with it? So I suppose as him as an individual, but then also why do all the others go along with it?
Right. Well, I think that if Nettie had the most optimal situation, I think possibly it would have been better to be before he married me. Maybe he would have come out as a gay man, because I think, you know, he grew up in a not any kind of, you know, religiously huge conservative thing. He grew up going to a Reformed Jewish synagogue, but you know, he was born in the mid 1950s, as I was, and so that was a very anti-gay time of childhood. It was he probably didn't know anyone, you know, at all who was gay. There are a couple of memories that I have from early in our marriage when we were in our 20s and we lived in Manhattan in the early 80s. I think he might have had a couple of gay encounters, you know, with another man. There was a man who approached us once who thought he was very good friends with Nettie, and Nettie sent him on his way. And of course, this is the kind of thing that comes back to you. It was just a little thing where he said, oh, no, I don't know you. It's mistaken identity, you know, but that kind of comes back to you when you're looking back at everything in your early adult life with 20/20 hindsight. And then the thing about the second question, I think that now with the internet, of course, there are, it's a different kind of abuse in a way. I think that that if you watch these manipulative, pornographic videos on YouTube as a young, vulnerable male or female, that you might get sucked into this cross-sex ideation. I think there are a lot of things that are just not being handled right, all the way down to physical education in the schools.